Imagine sitting on a flight thousands of meters above the Atlantic Ocean. Outside your window, there is nothing but darkness. Inside the cabin, passengers are sleeping peacefully, convinced they'll wake up in another country. Then, without warning, one engine falls silent. A few minutes later, the second engine dies too. Now imagine discovering that the aircraft carrying more than 300 people has become nothing more than a giant glider, with no engine power, no nearby city, and only the freezing Atlantic Ocean below. This is the unbelievable true story of Air Transat Flight 236, one of the greatest survival stories in aviation history. On the night of August 23, 2001, Toronto Pearson International Airport was full of travelers heading to Europe. Among the departing aircraft was an Airbus A330 scheduled to fly overnight to Lisbon, Portugal. On board were 293 passengers and 13 crew members. Most of the passengers expected a routine overnight journey. Families settled into their seats, children fell asleep, movies started playing, and cabin lights slowly dimmed. Just after midnight, the aircraft lifted off and climbed smoothly to its cruising altitude above the Atlantic Ocean. Everything appeared completely normal. But hidden inside one of the aircraft's engines was a mistake made days earlier. A mistake so small that nobody noticed it, yet powerful enough to put every life on board at risk. The story actually began more than a week before the flight. During a routine inspection, maintenance engineers discovered tiny metal particles inside the right engine's oil system. In aviation, this is never ignored. It usually means that something inside the engine is wearing out. The airline decided the safest solution was to replace the engine. Since no spare engine was immediately available, another compatible engine was borrowed and installed. At first glance, everything looked perfect, but appearances were deceiving. Although the replacement engine looked almost identical, some of its internal fuel and hydraulic connections belonged to an older design. Those small differences would soon become critical. While installing the engine, technicians faced an unexpected problem. Some components didn't fit together as expected. Normally, engineers would verify every step using the manufacturer's service documents. Unfortunately, technical manuals couldn't be accessed through the maintenance computers due to network problems. The correct information was actually available elsewhere, but the maintenance team never found it. Pressed by time and needing the aircraft ready for scheduled flights, they made what seemed like a harmless adjustment. The engine passed all ground tests. No alarms appeared. No fuel leaked. Everything seemed ready for service. The aircraft returned to flying passengers. No one realized that two metal tubes inside the engine were now sitting dangerously close together. Every flight after that slowly made the situation worse. The engine vibrated thousands of times every minute. With each vibration, the two metal lines rubbed against one another. The damage was microscopic at first. Then it slowly became deeper. Flight after flight, hour after hour, the metal became thinner. Eventually, only a tiny wall separated thousands of liters of fuel from open air. It was only a matter of time before it failed. Now return to the early hours of August 24th. Flight 236 was deep over the Atlantic Ocean, cruising at nearly 39,000 feet. The aircraft carried more fuel than required for the journey. On paper, there was no reason to worry. But hidden inside the right engine, fuel had already begun escaping through a growing crack. The leak became larger with every passing minute. Thousands of kilograms of fuel were disappearing into the darkness behind the aircraft. The frightening part? Neither the passengers nor the pilots knew it. The Airbus had no direct sensor capable of detecting this type of fuel leak. As far as the cockpit instruments were concerned, everything still looked almost normal. Hours into the flight, the pilots finally noticed something unusual. One side of the aircraft was showing less fuel than the other. Fuel imbalance is not uncommon in large aircraft, so the crew initially believed they were dealing with a routine systems issue. Instead of suspecting a leak, they followed the standard procedure used for balancing fuel between the wings. Unfortunately, this decision made the situation much worse. By opening the crossfeed system, fuel from the healthy tank also began flowing toward the damaged side. Instead of losing fuel from one tank, The aircraft was now draining fuel from both. The leak accelerated dramatically. Every second, precious fuel poured into the Atlantic Ocean. Yet inside the cabin, passengers continued sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that the aircraft's remaining flying time was disappearing faster than anyone imagined. The real emergency had only just begun. Inside the cockpit, the numbers refused to make sense. Despite the crew's attempts to correct the fuel imbalance, the fuel quantity kept dropping at an alarming rate. What they believed was a routine systems issue was actually something far more dangerous. Fuel wasn't simply moving between tanks. It was disappearing from the aircraft altogether. Realizing they no longer had enough fuel to reach Lisbon, the pilots searched for the nearest safe airport. Hundreds of kilometers away, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, lay the Azores Islands, a small chain of volcanic islands that would soon become the only hope for everyone on board. The crew immediately declared a fuel emergency and turned the Airbus toward Lodge's airbase. At that moment, they still believed one thing, that at least one engine would keep running long enough to reach land. They were wrong. A few minutes later, the right engine suddenly lost power. Without enough fuel to keep it running, it shut down completely. The aircraft immediately became harder to control. But luckily the aircraft reached to the nearest airport and landed successfully. Want to know how? Subscribe for part 2.